Welcome to our deep dive today into Don't Believe Everything You Think, the book by Joseph Nguyen. We're going to do things a little differently today. We're not going to have our normal back and forth. We're going to do a guided tour through some of the most fascinating points of the book. And today, we're really going to explore how much of our suffering is actually by choice, all thanks to the power of our thoughts.
It all starts with recognizing that pain is a part of life. It's unavoidable. But suffering, that's something else entirely. And one argues that suffering really stems from how we react to that pain. And more often than not, it's our thoughts that are calling the shots.
Yeah, this is a very powerful idea.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the example that Nguyen uses in the book where there are two people and they face the same exact event, which is job loss. One person completely falls apart, views it as a huge personal failure, and the other person sees it as a chance for a new beginning. It's the same exact situation, but two completely different experiences based solely on their mindset, based solely on their thoughts.
Precisely. And that's where Nguyen's ABC model comes in. A, adversity, B, belief, C, consequence. The adversity is the job loss, but it's the belief about that event that shapes the consequence, that shapes the emotional outcome. So are you viewing this as the end of the road or the start of a new path? That's the power of belief in action.
So really what you're saying is that our beliefs, our thoughts, they're not just idle chatter, right? They're actively shaping our reality.
Hey, that's right.
They're having a real impact.
Yeah.
It's almost like the event itself is neutral. It's just a blank canvas. But then it's our thoughts that come in and they splash the paint on it. And that's where the labeling of good or bad, that's where all that comes from. And from those labels, those very simple labels, is where our entire emotional response comes.
That's a crucial point. And it applies to so much more than just these big, major life events. Think about, for example, receiving some feedback at work. Okay, so one person might see some constructive criticism as a personal attack. Okay, so they're going to get defensive, and then they're going to miss an opportunity for growth. Another person might see that same feedback as a valuable input, as an opportunity, a chance to improve their skills. So, same feedback, different interpretations, totally different result.
So this makes me wonder, why are we so prone to overthinking in the first place? Is it just human nature? Or, is there something else going on?
Well, Nguyen suggests it actually goes way back to our evolutionary roots. You see, our brains are wired to constantly analyze and anticipate threats, okay? Because that's how our ancestors survived, by being hyper-aware of danger. But here's the catch. Most of us aren't facing these life or death situations every day, but our brains, they haven't quite caught up to modern life.
So instead of scanning for saber-toothed tigers,
Yeah.
we're fixated on that awkward email that we sent, or stressing over hypothetical problems that might never even happen. Our minds are stuck in overdrive even when there's no real need for it.
Imagine your mind as a security system, but it's constantly on high alert. It's always scanning for these potential threats. But, except, most of the time, it's triggering false alarms, okay? So it's leaving us in this state of unnecessary anxiety, and that's the evolutionary hangover, so to speak, that we're dealing with.
So I guess the question is, how do we break free from this overthinking cycle? If our brains are literally wired for it, can we actually change that?
Nguyen says the key is recognizing that there are two types of thinking. Passive thinking and active thinking. Passive thoughts are those that just kind of pop up. They're bubbles in a boiling pot of water. They come and go, often without us even realizing it. And active thinking is when we grab one of those bubbles and we hold onto it, we engage with that thought, we analyze it, and we let it consume our attention.
And that's really where things can go wrong, right?
Yeah.
When we give every thought that pops into our head our full attention, then we give it the power to kind of dictate our emotions and reactions, right?
Exactly. It's like inviting those thoughts in for tea and then letting them rearrange all your furniture while they're there. What Nguyen suggests instead is that we become more of an observer of our thoughts. So instead of getting caught up in the current, we step back and we watch the river flow. Thoughts arise, we acknowledge them, and then we let them drift on by.
This sounds a lot like the concept of mindfulness, right? But let's be real. Is it actually possible to just switch off that part of our brain that loves to worry and overanalyze everything?
It's not about switching it off. It's more about learning to relate to it in a different way. Think about it this way. If you had a friend who constantly told you these really negative, unhelpful things, would you just sit there and take it?
Probably not, no.
So it's the same with our thoughts. We don't have to believe everything they tell us. We can choose to, challenge them, to question their validity. And sometimes the best approach is to just acknowledge them and then let them go. It's kind of like, waving to a passing car without getting in.
Okay. That makes sense. But, there's so much pressure these days to like be positive all the time. Does Nguyen think that we need to like force ourselves to think positive thoughts?
This is where Nguyen gets really interesting. He actually pushes back on the idea of forced positivity. He argues that true well-being comes from recognizing the transient nature of thoughts, not from trying to control them. So all thoughts, whether they're positive or negative, they're fleeting, they come and go like clouds in the sky.
So instead of like clinging to positive affirmations that might not even feel authentic to us, it's more about accepting, I guess, accepting the full spectrum of our thoughts without judgment.
Right. Precisely. It's a subtle but very powerful shift. It's not about denying the negative, but it's about seeing it all with this sense of detachment, understanding that none of it is permanent.
So this brings us to a concept that at first glance might seem a bit paradoxical, which is non-thinking. How can we not think? What does that even mean? How do you even do that?
Yeah, it's not about like emptying the mind completely. It's more about creating space between ourselves and our thoughts. So imagine like a glass of muddy water, okay? If you keep stirring that glass of water, it just stays murky. It's hard to see through. But if you let it sit undisturbed, what happens? The mud settles and the water becomes clear.
So our minds are like that muddy water. And when we're constantly engaging with every single thought, we're just stirring things up. We're just creating more like mental chaos. But when we allow our minds to settle, then clarity emerges.
That's it. That's the essence of non-thinking. It's allowing thoughts to kind of flow through without getting caught up in them. It's about cultivating a state of stillness, of simply being present with whatever arises, without judgment.
This all sounds great in theory, but like, how does this translate to everyday life? Do we need to like sit on a mountaintop and like meditate for hours on end to actually achieve this?
Well, meditation is a great tool for cultivating non-thinking, but it's not the only way. You can practice it in small moments throughout your day. It could be as simple as taking a few deep breaths before, responding to a stressful email or pausing to appreciate the beauty of a sunset, like without analyzing it.
So it's not about eliminating our thoughts altogether. It's about kind of choosing which thoughts deserve our attention, which ones we need to really like engage with, and which ones we can just let pass by. But I have to ask, if we're not constantly like thinking and planning, aren't we just going to become like passive and unmotivated?
That's a common concern, but Nguyen argues that non-thinking actually unlocks a deeper level of intuition and more effective action. Because when we quiet that mental chatter, we can tap into this source of wisdom that's always there, guiding us toward what truly matters.
So instead of being like driven by our anxieties and all the what ifs, we're acting from a place of greater clarity and alignment with our true selves. Okay, I'm starting to get this. But what about, our ambitions, our goals? If we're not constantly striving and like pushing ourselves, won't we just kind of stagnate?
Here's the thing. Non-thinking isn't about giving up on our goals. It's about aligning them with our deepest desires, free from the pressure of, external expectations.
So it's like the difference between chasing someone else's dream versus pursuing a path that truly lights you up from the inside out, right?
Right. Exactly.
But how does this non-thinking connect to, to things like, love and creativity?
Oh,
Are they related somehow?
Absolutely. And Nguyen suggests that when we're not entangled in our thoughts, we actually become more receptive to experiencing unconditional love, both for ourselves and for others. We see the world and the people in it with fresh eyes, free from judgment and preconceived notions.
It's like we're dropping all the baggage of like past hurts and limiting beliefs, and then we can just allow for these deeper, more authentic connections to really emerge. And this openness, this also extends to our own creativity as well.
Think about the joy of, engaging in a hobby, but purely for the pleasure of it, without worrying about the outcome. That's the kind of creative energy that non-thinking unlocks.
That makes me think about the role of intuition. If we're not constantly analyzing every little thing, how do we tap into that inner voice, that inner wisdom, and make sure we're on the right path?
Nguyen actually places a lot of importance on listening to our intuition. He believes it's this very subtle guide, this compass that's always pointing us towards growth and fulfillment. But we can only hear it when we quiet the mental noise.
So it's about learning to trust that inner nudge, even when it goes against, conventional wisdom or the advice of others. But how do we know if it's really our intuition speaking, or if it's just like wishful thinking.
Well, think about it this way. So you're facing this really major life decision. Let's say it's choosing a career path. Okay,
Okay.
so you could spend hours weighing the pros and cons and analyzing every possible outcome and still feel lost. But what if instead of getting stuck in your head, you just tuned in to your gut feeling? Like what about that deep inner knowing that's kind of whispering, this feels right? That's where true clarity lies.
Hmm. So it's like our intuition is like a compass, guiding us towards our true north, even when the world around us is telling us to go in a totally different direction.
Hmm.
But there's still one thing I'm struggling with, which is this idea that nothing is inherently good or bad. How does that fit into all of this?
This is where Nguyen draws inspiration from Shakespeare. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's a really powerful reminder that our tendency to label events as good or bad, it's all in our minds.
So it's not the events themselves that cause us joy or pain. It's our
Correct.
it's our interpretation of them. This reminds me of that example you shared earlier about missing a flight.
Exactly. Imagine, you're at the airport and you miss your flight. Your first reaction might be, frustration, anger, maybe even, despair. But but what if you shifted your perspective? What if missing that flight actually led you to a chance encounter that changed your life? Or what if it gave you this unexpected time to just relax and enjoy a good book? The event itself hasn't changed, but your interpretation of it has. And that's ultimately what shapes your experience.
It's like we have this power to choose how we frame events, and then that choice ultimately determines whether we suffer or whether we find peace, even in really challenging situations.
And that's really the essence of what Nguyen is trying to convey. We have far more control over our experience of life than we realize. And that control lies in changing our relationship with our thoughts.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into Nguyen's ideas, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but my mind is already buzzing with new insights. Or maybe I should say, my mind is starting to settle with new insights.
It's a lot to take in, but remember, the key takeaway here is that our thoughts, they hold incredible power, and learning to observe them with a sense of detachment without getting swept away can lead to a more peaceful and ultimately more fulfilling life. Welcome back to our deep dive into Don't Believe Everything You Think. So we've been exploring the power of our thoughts and how so much of our suffering really might stem from how we react to pain. But now I think it's time to delve into some practical techniques for finding more peace and presence in our everyday lives.
Yeah, I'm definitely ready to start putting some of these ideas into practice. Where do we even begin? Like what's the first step?
Well, the first step is really awareness. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. We need to become conscious of those stories that our minds are constantly telling us, right? So pay attention to those recurring themes, those thoughts that trigger really strong emotional responses, the ones that leave you feeling drained or anxious or just not quite yourself.
So we're kind of becoming investigators of our own minds,
Yeah.
right? We're observing our thought patterns without judgment.
Precisely. And as you become more aware, you might notice that many of your thoughts are actually quite repetitive. They're habitual, even. We get stuck in these thought loops, replaying the same worries or anxieties over and over and over again.
It's like our minds are stuck on a broken record,
Right.
just playing the same track on repeat.
Exactly. And once you identify those thought loops, you can start to challenge them. Ask yourself, is this thought really true? Is it helpful? Is it serving me in any way?
So we're not just passively observing, we're actively questioning those thoughts, right? We're putting them on trial, so to speak.
Right. And often when we do that, we realize that many of these thoughts are based on assumptions or fears or these limiting beliefs that aren't even really rooted in reality. They're like shadows, they seem really scary in the dark. But when we shine a light on them, they lose their power.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those really stubborn thoughts that they just won't go away? No matter how hard we try to ignore them or push them down, they just keep coming back. What do we do about those?
Well, that's where mindfulness practices can be really helpful. Techniques like meditation or deep breathing, they can really help us create some space between ourselves and those thoughts.
So instead of trying to fight those thoughts or push them away, we learn to just kind of sit with them, acknowledge them, and let them be.
Imagine you're watching a storm from a safe distance. You acknowledge the power of the wind and the rain, but you don't get swept away by the chaos. You simply observe it until it passes. And our thoughts can be a lot like that storm.
That's a really powerful image. It reminds us that our thoughts are They're kind of like weather patterns, they come and go.
Yeah.
And we don't have to let them dictate our inner state, our inner peace.
As you practice mindfulness, you'll become less reactive to your thoughts. You'll be able to observe them without judgment, without getting hooked by their stories. It's about recognizing that they're not facts, they're just mental events, passing through like clouds in the sky.
So we're not aiming to stop thinking altogether, right?
Yeah.
We're just learning to choose which thoughts deserve our attention and which ones we can just kind of let pass by. But I have to be honest, a part of me still wonders if it's really possible to live a life completely free from overthinking. Won't we miss out on important insights or make bad decisions if we're not constantly analyzing everything?
Right. It's not about eliminating thinking altogether, It's about finding a healthy balance. Remember, our minds are incredible tools. We need them to problem solve, to make plans, and to navigate the world. But when thinking becomes excessive, it can be really detrimental to our well-being.
It's like anything else. Too much of a good thing can become a problem.
Think of your mind like a garden. You need to tend to it, cultivate the positive, and weed out the negative. And non-thinking is about creating the space for those positive seeds to flourish.
That's a beautiful analogy. But how do we actually do that? How do we cultivate those positive seeds?
Well, one way is to practice gratitude. When we focus on what we're grateful for, it shifts our attention away from those negative thought patterns. It's like fertilizing those positive seeds, helping them to grow stronger.
So it's about consciously choosing to focus on the good, even amidst, challenges or difficulties.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything, grand or extraordinary. It could be as simple as appreciating a warm cup of coffee or a sunny day or a kind gesture from a stranger.
This reminds me of something else that Nguyen mentioned in the book, which is the importance of self-compassion. We tend to be our own worst critics.
That's so true. But imagine if we treated ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we offer to a good friend. Instead of beating ourselves up for every little mistake, we offer words of encouragement and support.
So when we notice those negative thoughts creeping in, we can gently remind ourselves that we're doing the best we can, that we're worthy of love and compassion even when we fall short.
It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, constantly learning and growing.
This makes me think about another challenge that people might face when they first start exploring this idea of non-thinking, which is the fear of becoming passive or unproductive if they're not constantly thinking and planning. Is there a way to practice non-thinking without losing our drive or our ambition?
Absolutely. Remember, non-thinking isn't about becoming passive. It's about accessing a deeper level of wisdom and intuition that can actually enhance our effectiveness. It's like clearing away the mental clutter so we can really focus on what truly matters, on what truly inspires us.
So it's not about giving up on our goals or ambitions. It's about approaching them with more clarity and intention, guided by our inner compass rather than those external pressures.
Imagine, an artist who's trying to paint this masterpiece, but their mind is just filled with self-doubt and distractions. Their brush strokes are going to be hesitant, their colors muted. But when that same artist quiets their mind and allows their creativity to flow freely, their work becomes vibrant and alive and truly inspiring.
It's like they're tapping into a source of inspiration that's beyond the reach of their conscious mind. And that applies to all areas of life, right? Not just creative pursuits.
Think about a leader who's making an important decision. If they're weighed down by anxieties and second-guessing, their choices might be clouded by fear. But when that same leader cultivates a state of inner peace and clarity, their decisions are much more likely to be aligned with their values and their vision.
So it's not about becoming emotionless robots, It's about finding that sweet spot where our thoughts and emotions are working in harmony, guiding us towards a more fulfilling life.
Precisely. And this actually brings us to another practical technique that can really help us cultivate non-thinking, which is spending time in nature.
Oh, yeah. That's something I've always found to be incredibly grounding and rejuvenating.
And there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
In nature, we're surrounded by beauty and simplicity. We're reminded that there's this larger rhythm to life, this flow that we're all a part of.
It's like our worries and anxieties just kind of fade into the background as
Wow.
we connect with something so much bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And even if you can't get out into nature every day, try bringing some elements of nature into your home or your workspace, things like plants, natural light, calming colors. It can make a world of difference.
This has been incredibly insightful. I'm starting to see how these practical techniques can really help us shift our relationship with our thoughts and create more peace in our daily lives.
Remember, it's a journey, not a destination. Be patient with yourself, celebrate those small victories, and keep exploring what works for you.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Don't Believe Everything You Think. We've been exploring the power of our thoughts, the concept of non-thinking, and we've even touched on some really practical techniques for cultivating a more peaceful mind. But as with any new skill, right? I mean, there can be some bumps in the road, there can be challenges. So what are some common challenges or misconceptions that people might encounter on this journey?
One of the biggest misconceptions is that non-thinking is about suppressing our thoughts or, trying to achieve this state of complete mental emptiness, like we're supposed to transform into these emotionless robots, devoid of any thoughts or feelings.
Yeah, it almost sounds a bit scary, to be honest. It's like we're trying to erase a part of ourselves.
Right. And that's not the goal at all. Non-thinking isn't about denying our thoughts or emotions. It's about learning to relate to them in a new way. So instead of getting swept away by every single thought that arises, we create space around them. We acknowledge them, but we don't let them control us.
So we're not trying to shut down our minds completely. We're simply expanding our awareness, right, to include both the thoughts and the space around them. It's about recognizing that we're not our thoughts. We're the observer of our thoughts.
Exactly. And another challenge that people might face is this fear of becoming passive or unproductive if they're not constantly thinking and planning. Our society tends to equate busyness with productivity. So the idea of slowing down, of quieting our minds, it can feel almost counterintuitive.
Right. You can feel like we're going against the grain, like we're not doing enough if we're not, constantly striving or achieving.
Right, right. But as we discussed, non-thinking isn't about becoming passive. It's about accessing a deeper level of wisdom and intuition that can actually enhance our effectiveness. It's like clearing away the mental clutter so we can focus on what truly matters, on what truly inspires us.
It's like we're stepping off the hamster wheel of endless to-dos and really tuning into our inner compass, letting it guide us towards a more fulfilling path.
Precisely. And this can be especially challenging in a world that's constantly bombarding us with, information and demands and all of these things. But the truth is, when we're constantly overthinking, we're actually using up so much precious mental energy that could be directed towards more meaningful action.
It's like we're running a marathon, but we have this backpack that's full of rocks. We might be moving, but we're certainly not moving with ease or efficiency.
Right, right. And another challenge that people might encounter is this tendency to judge themselves when they notice that their minds are wandering. It's so easy to fall into the trap of self-criticism, like, "Ugh, I'm doing it again, I'm overthinking, I'm such a failure at this non-thinking thing."
Yeah. It could be like we're taking 2 steps forward and then 1 step back.
Right. But remember, the very act of noticing that your mind is wandering, that is a sign of progress. It means you're becoming more aware of your thought patterns, which is the first step towards changing them.
So instead of beating ourselves up, we can just acknowledge the thought and then gently guide our attention back to the present moment.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a sense of self-compassion in the process. We're all learning, and it's okay to make mistakes. The key is to keep practicing and to be patient with ourselves.
Yeah. It's like learning to ride a bike. We're going to wobble. We might even fall a few times. But with practice, we'll eventually find our balance. And speaking of practice, there's another misconception that can trip people up, which is this idea that non-thinking is like a one-time achievement.
Right. It's not like you flip a switch and suddenly you're a Zen master. It's not like that at all. Non-thinking is an ongoing practice. It's a journey of self-discovery and transformation.
So it's not a destination. It's a path. And it's a
Ah,
path that we might need to course correct from time to time, really.
exactly. It's about showing up each day and making a conscious effort to cultivate more peace and presence in our minds. And some days will be easier than others, you know. Some days we'll feel like we're gliding along effortlessly, while other days it'll feel like we're, paddling upstream.
But the important thing is to keep showing up,
Right.
keep practicing, keep learning.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There are so many resources available to support you. You know, books, meditation apps, communities of like-minded individuals who are also exploring this path of non-thinking.
Yeah, it's reassuring to know that there's this whole community of people who are navigating these same challenges and supporting each other along the way.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Don't Believe Everything You Think, I'm curious, what are some of your biggest takeaways from our exploration?
For me, it's this realization that we have so much more control over our thoughts than we realize. And that by changing our relationship with our thoughts, we can really transform our experience of life. And it's not about becoming like these emotionless robots. It's about finding that sweet spot where our thoughts and emotions are working in harmony, guiding us towards a more fulfilling life.
That's beautifully said. Remember, the journey to a more peaceful and fulfilling life, it begins with a single thought. The thought that you can choose to think differently.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this exploration has inspired you to embark on your own journey of non-thinking, of finding more peace and presence in your own life. And until next time, may your thoughts be kind, your mind be clear, and your heart be at ease.